Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. We've got a really special guest this week. I look forward to this conversation. It's going to be very, very interesting and unique and give some folks like you and me some insight into really one of the leaders of a movement centered originally around Donald Trump, but it's really a movement about average Americans that want and demand to have a say in how their country is governed, what it does, and how we participate in it. So the title of the show this week is "The Time Is Now for the American Working Class to Take a Stand," and my guest recently appeared in a Mother Jones article that one conservative influencer said described him as the godfather of the movement. What movement? I'd call it the Independent Americans political movement, but the establishment might likely call it the MAGA or the deplorables movement. The article describes this man as a creator of the political conference AMPFest. The bearded 57-year-old businessman originally from Richmond, Virginia, is named Alex Phillips. A relative newcomer to right-wing politics at the beginning, Phillips owned a small wireless internet service provider in Virginia's Shenandoah Valley that has gotten contracts with the USDA to develop rural internet. He was long active in the Wireless Internet Service Providers Association, which represents independent wireless companies and lobbies the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission. He's also served as the group's president. His credentials have made him prominent enough to be quoted as an expert on rural broadband in the Washington Post and appointed twice by the FCC to serve on a consumer advisory committee. Alex has even spoken at the National Defense University and the Armed Forces Communications and Electronics Association. Mr. Phillips is working on a new project, and I'm excited about it, American Workers United, that is focused on helping working Americans restore their First and Fifth Amendment rights through litigation. And frankly, it's about time we all stepped up to help those average Americans fight back. Alex, my friend, welcome back, or welcome to the Rob Maness Show. It's good to have you.
Hey, Rob, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I'm excited about this interview, sir. First of all, though, how are you doing? I read this Mother Jones article, and it looked like it started out as a hit piece, but actually it's a very in-depth presentation, and I think, unless you tell me otherwise, it accurately quotes you in what you said about some of the things that have been going on the last few years and your role in organizing AMPFest, American Priorities Conference.
Yeah, so I did have a conversation via email with the reporter Stephanie, and it was obviously a biased article, and I actually talked with her afterwards, and but I decided that I was going to answer some of her questions. Sometimes people within our movement decides they don't want to talk to left-wing or progressive outlets because just feeding the fire of propaganda against us, but I feel pretty strongly about my position on some things, and I think how I'm being portrayed, especially at least the beginnings of that article and how other articles have been about me, is not exactly correct, because I think that's generally speaking how the left or progressive media wants to pigeonhole a lot of us as being these people that I don't know. I don't really know exactly why, but not everybody in our group is the same. And I actually talked about this at a event in Texas a couple years ago, where I did my we all wear different hats routine. I only had 15 minutes to talk, and I had a box full of hats. But we all are different. We're not the same. We have different positions on things. And the reason why I got involved in this movement, coming from the internet industry, I understood, because I've been in the internet business, since the day of dial-up internet. When you heard that modem going to squeal, and people didn't know why the internet existed. They didn't know why they were using it, and then before you knew it, everybody had to have it. They had to have dial-up internet, then they had to be faster and broadband. So I've been involved in this, since 2001, and I understood that people are communicating online, and people are using the internet more and more for business and personal and interactions with folks. Some people spend too much time on the internet, and I'll be the first one to admit that. But it is the first time in history, at least the history that we know, that one person can speak to the entire world. When I kind of jokingly say this, but even the time of when Jesus was around, he could only speak to those people that could hear him, and then
Hmm.
eventually his word got spread through word of mouth. But now, um, my voice or your voice or anyone's voice that's connected to the internet can be heard by the entire planet, or at least most of the people that have internet access on the planet, which is a surprisingly large number.
Yeah.
And these social media companies, and these other companies like Google and Facebook, these were companies that I had interactions with during my tenure as a board member of WISPA and also as the president. So I kind of
Hmm.
understood where they were coming from. And from a business perspective, being able to control how people interact online and helping them decide what they want to do is a very, very powerful thing. And at the end of the day, when you look at the internet as an invention that man created, it's probably more powerful than anything else ever created because it can allow people to communicate, but it also can allow people to make decisions. And if you can control the information that people use to make these decisions, then you can control essentially what decisions they make. I mean,
Oh
you
yeah.
know, I've been involved in wireless, and I get asked this question because it's second sort of like a joke to me. But 5G, is it a mind control thing? And I said, well, maybe not the wireless waves themselves, but the thing that you're looking at, maybe, because people drive off the road following Google Maps because they're not paying attention to where they're going. But moreover, they make decisions to buy shoes or groceries or which person they vote for based on the information that they get out of those little phones and computer boxes that they listen to that are connected to the internet. So it's a very important thing. So I got involved because I saw a trend in the 2016 election that the news media and the internet specifically were trying to change the narrative. They were kind of shocked that Donald Trump, this guy from business and industry, was able to capitalize on this technology in a way to speak to people that were longing to hear something and tell them in a sense what they wanted to hear in some cases, but actually follow through with it in other cases. So the problem that I saw is that it was so easy to change that narrative online,
Yeah,
and I
yeah,
wanted.
yeah. It is. That's one of the reasons why I'm excited about your new project. But we'll talk about that in a minute. But my little website, robmanus.com, we started it in the spring of 2020, and by the end of September, it had almost 1 million page views per month. So it was really taking off. And then 1st of October, Facebook, which was my largest audience then and still is, really started suppressing any website that appeared to be talking about conservatives. And I think I've lost about $500,000 in pre-tax revenue based on their actions, and it's stayed that way except for a very few days in January 2021, leading up to January 6th. But from then on, it's stayed that way. So they know that people make decisions based on the information they're getting, and that the reliability of that information can be what's the word I'm looking for? Can be adjusted by them. I think it might be a good common word to use. Am I right?
Yeah, well, it's throughout history, the print media has been the source for information for a lot of folks. I mean, all the way
Hmm.
back to caveman days. They do put stuff on walls so they could remember it. But
Yeah.
you can even go back to the Revolutionary War. Britain has been probably the kings of media and information manipulation. They were the ones that sort of invented it, I think, early on in American history, at least. And
Yeah.
we're providing misinformation all the way through World War II, with the idea it was for the better of the good whole. And
Hmm.
those are things that, but in today's world, people need to have access to information, even bad information. I think is important because outside of the box thinking can sometimes be perceived as wrong think. It could be perceived as crazy thought. It could be, men throughout history were accused of being ridiculous and foolhardy. The men that thought we could fly, the men that thought we could go to space, the men that thought, all these things that we take for granted today. were all thought of as fools
That the
at their
earth was round.
yeah, yeah. So all these things, so even bad ideas can be worthwhile because they will make you think. Why is that a bad idea? Oh, okay, that's why. And then if it's a situation where it's a bad idea because you've been thinking about things in a certain way all your life because that's how you were raised or that's how you were taught, but now you're considering another way that may not be congruent or part of a narrative of what of your normal life, could open your eyes to something. And so I think what's happened over the years is that a group of people in media have been trying to capitalize on this, and you know the simplest way to explain how to control media for the benefit of a business application is one of the things that Google has expressed they want to do. They're very interested in 3D printing, for example, and the 3D manufacturing specifically, where you can look for something online that may not exist. Google will understand what you want and then route it to their AI computers. Their AI computers will then manufacture this thing on the fly and then sell it to you. And that would be the ultimate business application, to be able to have the exact product that everybody wants at the moment that they want it, every time, every day. So, being able to provide news and information to folks in the form that they want to hear it provides an audience that will keep coming back. If all you do is tell people what they want to hear and they are happy with that, then they will keep coming back to you. But if you tell people something they don't agree with, then they may not agree with you and they may not like you. So there's a lot of segmentation and a lot of division going on right now in media. And, it's for almost, it's sometimes not for political reasons, but for financial reasons. It's very easy to sell products to people on a television show when everybody agrees with everything you say.
Yeah, it is, but that also kind of gets back to what you were talking about people like us needing. We need to go on non-friendly media, is what I call them. I've been interviewed by CNN several times. I've been interviewed by Chuck Todd, who a lot of conservatives hate with a passion. But I did that because the people that watch those programs don't see information that they may not agree with very often. So I get your point about that. I mean, there's nothing. One of the reasons about this article in Mother Jones that caught my attention, Alex, is that throughout the article, and it's a very long article and very detailed, the reporter attempts to link you to the violence of January 6th. And that gets to, they're trying to control that media information and that narrative as it's defined by that. And I found it interesting that the things that you would say back to them. Take the audience through that just for a minute and respond to this craziness. Because I did my research on you, and I know people that have known you for a long time that have participated in your conferences and everything. And like me, you are not an advocate of political violence. I mean, that would be an absolute last resort, especially here in the United States of America, when we have so many tools that we can use, if we use them, to change things.
Well, so before I explain that, one of the things that I think is good as sort of a base piece of information that people don't pay attention to, and that is a point of information that comes from the Pew Trust group, which is a very progressive left-wing operation. I mean, they're liberal. But they've been tracking public trust in government since I think the early 70s, and amazingly enough, it was pretty high back then. But now it's dipped down to the single digits. And my biggest concern going into some of the things that we were doing in DC around that 2020 election period is that people's trust in government is really low, and it doesn't seem to be trending upward at all. It seems to be trending downward. And if you understand the principles of what government is, it comes down to a basic trust called the social contract, where I, as an individual, give up certain things so that I may be governed. And there's some benefits to being governed. I don't have to be worried about law and order. I don't have to be worried about civil organization and structure, things like roads and civil services. So there's a lot of benefits to that, and so it's a trade-off. But there has to be trust. So the government has to trust me, and I have to trust the government. And anything below 50% is probably not good. And we're now in the single digits. So my concern going into it is I heard a lot of people talking about things in a way that to me sounded like this there's no going this direction, and it doesn't end up becoming violent. And so
Right.
when I would go to DC and organize with folks, my message was that the vote was our ultimate free speech. It's really it was our original free speech to decide from our individual vote who we think is best for president or any other office that we're voting for.
Right.
And that speech being taken away from us, or manipulated or minimized in any way, is a serious problem to that trust, because we were given those rights in the Constitution to elect our leaders, and our Constitution protects our rights to vote and our rights to speak and our rights to due process and things that are important that are part of that contract. And any kind of degradation of that really leads to a long-term problem. And if it doesn't get fixed, then it will continue to get worse until it gets critical. And I have boys, and I don't want my boys to live in the world of Mad Max, so to speak.
Yeah.
That's a dystopian future. I also don't want them to live in the world of Blade Runner. There's a lot of dystopian futures out there that media and the news, I mean, the movies industry has made that are not really great.
Right.
I guess I'm a nerd, so I like Star Trek. So I'd like to live them in the world of Star Trek, to be honest with you, where it sort of still has democracy, um, and but some socialism is still there because they're all social efforts that people need to have help. So it's a kind of a balance of things.
Right.
So I'm not an extremist in that. I think that everybody should vote Republican all the time. I'm not that guy. I am my own person, and I have my beliefs, and I have certain liberal beliefs, and I have certain conservative beliefs. I think a balance of the two is important. In fact, I heard a very good story. I can't remember the author, but he was a liberal writer, and he was explaining how conservatism does help balance out some of the things. We all want the perfect world, utopian world, but the reality is that you still got to pay for it. And
Well,
so,
that's I mean that's what we call it's what I think I am, a classical liberalism.
yeah,
I mean, for one, if you want to categorize what you believe as a term, you sound very similar to myself, and that's what I think the founders of the United States were. The intellectual side of it, that's where they were coming from. Is that there should be some government, but it should be limited to the
right,
point where it should be limited to the point where it doesn't become necessary to do what they did, and the things you described I don't want my sons living in Mad Max or Blade Runner or being in endless wars. I don't want them in them,
right. I think
and
that
I don't
the
want my
war we're in,
daughter in them.
the wars that we're in right now, I think were all created. But regardless, when it comes to January 6th, I was very concerned about it. And I was there. I didn't have any control over. I'm just one person. I couldn't really control everybody. I
Yeah,
could see that there were forces ginned up to make this thing a disaster on both sides. And it's not just the conservative side, because
right.
there's a lot of things that President Trump asked for that didn't happen. I saw police opening up barricades. I saw the police essentially allowing people up the steps at the Capitol, and I saw all these things, and I recognized people that were there to agitate.
Hmm.
And there was a whole group of people that I was with that also noticed that, and were saying stop.
Yeah,
And but there's obviously a lot of angst and a lot of upset people about how things unfolded, and I think that shutting us down in social media and stopping the dialogue, although considered dangerous from a perspective, was dangerous to curtail also. They should have allowed the discussion. They should have allowed cases to be heard. They should have allowed things to be done, and let it be settled, because leaving it unsettled was probably the worst thing that could have happened.
And I think it's harming our society now. We're extremely divided when you look at the numbers, and I do when I do my root cause analysis to where we are today from that perspective, it goes right back to the way things were done after January 6th, and hopefully. It sounds like Kevin McCarthy's going to release the 14,000 hours of video because the parts of the story that have been suppressed, like what you just talked about, the provocateurs at the leading edge of the crowd, and those kind of things, that's all been suppressed in favor of this narrative that there was some kind of insurrection, et cetera, and bad people is what we are that believe in limited government and classical liberalism, basically.
Well, sometimes I feel like we're living in an alternate universe, like in Sliders, the TV show. I'm obviously a sci-fi nut, so
Yeah.
we've slid through, and we're now living in the world where every conspiracy theory is true, and and we were all accusing the social media of doing this and that, and they were all disagreeing with us while they were having conversations with the very government that was executing the censorship with them. And now it's all coming. It took a billionaire to buy Twitter to release all this information. And I will say this without any actual knowledge of it, but with 100% confidence. There's a truckload, if not larger, of information that Elon Musk has not released that I think would be very difficult for the rest of the world and our country to deal with. And I think he's plagued with how much information he does share, because one of the biggest concerns I had, again, in the run up to January 6th, and I think most people will understand this, is that our nation is like a house. Okay, it's got a foundation, it's got pillars, it's got a roof, it's got walls, it's got all these things that make it a whole construction. And the pillars of some of the things that I think are in danger right now are things like the FBI, for example, law enforcement, the executive branch, people that we rely on to protect us. Because again, coming back to the social contract, I give up certain things of myself so that I may be governed, and law enforcement is definitely one of those things. And we've been betrayed. I mean, there's no other way to put it. It's not, there's no politically correct way to say that. We have been betrayed by those people that we trust. Now, do I feel like the FBI needs to be gutted and everything needs to be wrecked? Well, I don't know if I want to go to that extreme, but there's a real big problem. And I think that, Bill Barr was challenged with that task because he knows some things that he did. He's a federalist and he believes in these pillars. He believes in the structure of government, and that without it, it's anarchy and chaos, essentially. And so we have to somehow, kind of bring this ship back on course to where it was supposed to be, but we have to do it kind of in an easy, gradual way without throwing people off board. And that's my name.
Yeah, well, and there's a way to do it, but I might have a little bit of a dissimilar view on the FBI than you do, but it comes from a perspective of accountability and somebody that's worked in the military for 30 plus years, and part of that work was in the intelligence business. So I'm very familiar with how, the rules of engagements for intelligence, the classified nature of the operations, the dangers of collecting, surveilling American citizens on our own soil, and the massive amounts of law and regulations surrounding it. And the people that broke those laws have not been held accountable, especially on the FISA court and those kind of things. And that all goes back to the FBI and the Department of Justice. We've got to do some really close inspection of that and some restructuring, and look at what do we really need as a people now. Do we really need that type of organization like the FBI, considering the way we've got technology today and communications, or is it better left to state level and local law enforcement with a loosely tied network of science, labs and those kind of things. But you're right. I mean, you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater, but we do have to take a look at things that have gone awry. They really have.
Yeah, the betrayal is deep and serious, and I think that accountability is very important. I think people need to be held accountable. I think there's a lot of people during the January 6th situation that need to be held accountable. Every time I see a politician post about President Trump leading an insurrection, I always have to remind them of the story, written in the Washington Post or New York Times that says the FBI says there was no insurrection, and there wasn't, because
That's right.
it was just a bunch of people that all were thinking the same thing, and they were all very upset, and they got jacked up about it. And this has happened in a lot of countries, but it happened in those countries because there was corruption. And so it didn't happen in our country because there was not corruption. It happened in our country for the same reason that it happens in other countries. And so people need to own that. And I think that you can't just keep denying it. You can't keep calling it an insurrection. I didn't agree with things that people did. I stayed where I was supposed to be. I was actually handing out flyers to talk to people about, what do we do about our political system? Maybe we need a new third party. Maybe we need to, those are the types of things that I was trying to get. And I did talk to a lot of folks, and they were a lot of angry people. Oddly enough, and I complimented this lady for her bravery. There was a Democrat in that mix of people at the Capitol.
I'm sure there were many. I'm sure there were many.
She was holding up her signs, and I walked up to her and I said, I'd like to congratulate you for your bravery to be in this mix, and I support your right to say what you're saying. I don't agree with it, but I support your right. And I shook their hand and I said, thank you for coming and doing what you felt was right. But then there was other people there that didn't have good intentions, and they were wearing MAGA hats, and they were doing things to get people all jacked up and spun up, and I did not appreciate that.
I agree with you. I mean, I have always said, I wasn't there. I wasn't anywhere near I was down here on the beach in Mississippi, because my wife said, "There's no way you're going up there for that speech," because I wanted to go hear the president speak that day. But what I've always said is the people that did violence on that day or instigated violence on that day, they need to be held accountable.
Watch the rest of this interview on Red Voice Media Premium using the link below. Completely uncensored and ad-free. Not a member yet? Try it for $1.